Right. Checking with Melissa, is that our two guests are that the only two people in the waiting room?
Those are the only two people in the waiting room so far. We'll see if anyone else can join us, during their lunch hour. And
Sounds good.
I did start recording.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So thanks for those that have joined today for the request for application work group for the YDC work group regarding our application process for the 2025-27 biennium. In just a moment, we'll do some introductions, but as we're getting started, those that have just joined us, if you can kind of, Melissa, do you want to share the screen? I just realized we're not sharing the screen. That would help. I was reading my screen, which is shared, but it's just to me. Sorry about that. All right. So appreciate those that are joining us today. If you can see on the bottom of the screen, we do ask that people change their titles just so that we have a better record of who's here. And so if you're a YDO member or staff or a YDC member, please change it to YDO in front of your name, and then invited guests or invited participants and other guests using those acronyms. So, all right, next slide, please. I gotta better keep track over here. All right, so just a quick overview of, oh, no, Sally, I need to stop because that goes to you, right?
Sure, happy to take over.
All right.
I'm Sally Deck, and I'll get things kind of started here. Our agenda for today is to go through some introductions. We will then review our work group structure and our working agreements of how we function as a team and a group. We'll go over what happened in the June 28th meeting, just to kind of recap. We'll talk then, like the biggest, most important part of today's agenda are the discussions around the Reengagement grant scope and requirements, and then the community investment grant scope and initiatives. So Paul just mentioned this, but if you haven't yet, please go ahead and change your name in Zoom so that we can know kind of who is in the room, and that helps us to facilitate the conversation and also understand the relationship that folks have to the work that we do. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is actually just start with YDO staff, and if we can just have YDO staff popcorn and state your name and your title, that'll be really helpful. And then I'll call on the other guests that we have in the room. The hope is that everyone can share name, organization, and role, kind of your familiarity with YDO grants and or the RFA process. And then also if you could drop in the chat your name, your organization, your job title, that helps as well. So if we could just start, I'm Sally Deck. I am the Future Ready Grant Analyst and handle a handful of other grants within YDO. Paul, I'll pass it to you, and then if we can just go through the rest of the grant managers, that'd be great.
Sounds great. And thanks, Sally. I apologize. I totally forgot to introduce myself, both for the record as well as for the group. We just jumped right in. So Paul Sell, Associate Director here at Youth Development Oregon, helping oversee our youth grants programs. Again, thank you for the council members and other folks that are joining us today. I'll turn it over to Jared.
Hi, everyone. Jared Shaw, Grant Manager and Workforce Analyst at YDO. And I'll turn it to Molly.
Good afternoon. Molly Burns, Grant Manager and Reengagement Analyst here at YDO. And I'll pass it to Abe.
Hello, Abraham Magana, Grant Manager, Operations Analyst, work with the Community Investment Funds. With that, I'll pass it to Bill.
Good morning. My name is Bill Hansel with Youth Development Oregon. I'm a grant manager and data lead. And with that, I'll pass it to Melissa.
Thanks, Bill. Hello, everyone. Melissa Gallardo. I'm Youth Development Oregon Executive Support Specialist. And I'm looking around. Jared, have you gone already? You have. Uh-oh. I'll pass it to Tanasia because I haven't heard from you yet. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. Tanasia Bishop, Youth Grants Administrative Specialist with YDO. And I think that's all of the YDO staff. So I'll pass it back to Sally.
Great, thank you. And then if we can, I'll just call on folks so you don't have to guess what order you're going to go in. Zan, could you lead off the introductions?
Thank you. I'm Zan Ojero. I am a Youth Development Council member and a commissioner for Benton County. And I'm going to turn off my camera so that I can eat my lunch for a bit.
Sounds good. And Bethany.
I am Bethany Tramer with the Oregon Alliance of Boys and Girls Clubs, the director there. And I will say I'm mildly familiar with RFA process. So just here listening in.
Glad to have you. And I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Is it Jocelyn?
Sorry, it's
the mic.
Yoseline, and Yoseline had added in the chat that her microphone isn't working today. But Yoseline, thanks for joining us. I think, let's see, you are with OHSU and you are a YDO council member. Thank you.
Excellent. Oh, and now I see it's popped up in the chat that she said, hi, I'm here. Thank you, Jocelyn. And then Sam, if you could also introduce yourself.
Hi, sorry, I was finding the mute and on the video. Sam Ko from Oregon Department of Ed, ad hoc or ed official member or ad hoc member of YDO, and I'm gonna be honest, I have a good familiar of the RP process as of now, but it changes. That's the thing, you know, OD changes. So as of right now, I would say yes, but you know, who knows? And then I don't know if Paul or other YDO people like sometimes it changes person to person. You know, that's the thing too. So I'm just saying, as far as I like in my mind, I know it, but then my mind could be incorrect.
All right, glad to have everybody here and for the opportunity to create more transparency and clarity around YDO's RFA processes and certainly the way those change based on funding and legislative requirements that we have. And so it is our intention that we can create greater clarity and transparency so folks know what is going to happen for the 25-27 biennium. Next slide, please. So which leads into the structure of our work group. So what we have intended to have happen in this work group is that this can be a recurring touch point. So these meetings are happening in a whole series, and that council members and also other stakeholders are invited to learn about what's happening, and then also to bring issues to everyone's awareness so that we can be as well informed as possible as we go into the RFA writing process. The dialogue that we have in this group is non-binding. Our intention is to keep our RFA development process moving forward. We have timelines that we need to meet, and we also want to continue to include as many people in the conversation as possible. Just to reiterate again, so we have increased transparency around our funding, our scope, and the development of our RFAs. Next slide, please. Handful of agreements that we have for this work group is to keep the discussion and our conversation and dialogue focused on our current agenda topics. We have a list of our agenda topics that are published. It looks like Melissa's dropping them in the chat now. The intention is that people will be able to pop in and out. You don't have to attend all of the conversations in order to hear about a certain agenda item. But we want to make sure that people are aware that we'll be focused on specific agendas on specific days, and that we will be using our 2025-2027 RFA continuous improvement areas and our YDO equity lens to guide our discussions. It is an agreement that we have that YDC members and invited participants have priority during discussion. We'll be able to utilize the chat and reaction functions to share ideas, to request to share or speak, and to emphasize important points during the discussion. So we want to make good use of the tools that we have within Zoom. And we ask that folks remain muted until called on by a facilitator, and also to turn on your camera while speaking, if that is possible for you during this meeting. We love to get to see faces and to be engaged in that way. And we ask that everyone stay committed to our allotted time so that we can continue to facilitate and ensure that we cover all of the topics that we have on our agenda. Looks like Melissa has put a bunch of really great resources in the chat, so I encourage everyone to take a peek there as they have time. And Paul, I will turn it over to you for the next slide.
All right. Thank you, Sally. And I want to apologize. Molly, did we miss you on introductions? So Molly Rogers, did we miss you? I apologize. If you want to come off mute and introduce yourself, it would be great. If you're not eating, I can't tell if you're eating or not.
I put it in the chat, not a problem.
Oh, okay, perfect.
I'm a member of the Youth Development Council, and I would say I'm fairly familiar with the process.
Awesome. Thank you, Molly. I appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Paul and Molly, for your grace. Molly, I saw you in there and then it's like the video popped. I am so sorry. I did not mean to exclude you.
All right. And so the resources that Melissa put into the chat, I appreciate that. That will take you to some of the public YDC or to the public YDC Workgroup meeting materials, which does include the last slide deck of material that we covered on it. Our intention for each of these workgroup meetings is kind of to start the same way. And so thank you, Sally, for running us through that work, and then do a quick meeting recap of what we talked about, just to update folks from the prior meeting, and then we'll jump into the new content on that side. And so in our last meeting, we really laid out initially on kind of on the left side of the screen, we laid out the youth grants framework. And so what we're moving forward with in terms of our large RFA process is three main requests for applications, or in other words, the RFA. One focused on community investments, another focused on re-engagement, and then a third focused on workforce development. We're being specific in that we're creating a separate and distinct RFA for workforce development. It has typically lived in community investments as an initiative. It also, with the Future Ready framework and grants, lived in an RFA request by itself as well. So we are combining all of those into that workforce development request for application. And then down at the bottom of that graphic, you can see that the re-engagement collaboratives are going to be a requirement for moving forward for our re-engagement and workforce development grants. As that work continues, that is a requirement that is currently underway with those grants. We're going to keep that in that structure. The other piece of the work group that we covered, and Sally did a recap of that structure and goals and agreements, just to be clear, so that we can have these facilitated conversations strategically during the development of the RFA. So they'll focus on those specific topics, and those topics and all that information is posted in that public YDC Workgroup meeting folder that you can access at any time, should you want to go back to that. And then we did do some follow-up messages coming out in announcing this work group to all of the YDC email list serve that we have on government delivery. And so that email went out to everybody that has signed up for that to make them aware of this meeting. So, and this isn't in the slide deck, but just want to pause if any of our new folks, and appreciate some folks that joined us last time, but also some new council members joining us today. Is there any questions about what we covered the last time, or the meeting in general, or what this work group focus is? All right, awesome. So next slide, please. So one of our primary agenda topics today was to focus on our re-engagement grants. And just kind of a small note, you'll notice that it says re-engagement opportunity grant. That is our largest re-engagement grant that we have. That's the direct service. We're purposely focusing on that specific grant outside of, and not talking about the collaboratives, because there's some specific re-engagement collaboratives, because there's some specific details that we're not quite ready to look into within that work. So we're looking at the direct service re-engagement opportunity grants. And what you see on the screen is just kind of a quick summary of the primary focus and scope of those grants. And then the next slide will talk about what some of the changes that we are currently considering and proposing to move forward with. So the primary focus of re-engagement opportunity grants is to serve youth ages 14 through 24 who have left high school before earning a high school diploma or GED, and or are at imminent risk of leaving without that high school completion option. There is quite a bit of governance around that. You can see those ORSs and the OARs posted on the screen there that governs that around eligible youth, as well as eligible entities that can apply for it, and the focus of the grant. So there is some pretty specific legislation focused on that. The goals of that re-engagement opportunity grant is to identify youth who have left or are at risk of leaving high school before completion, before completing. Sorry, I tried to say 2 words at once there. The placement into an educational pathway for completion of high school. So it's the idea that we're placing them, getting them back into educational services to complete that high school, and then assist youth in education completion, post-secondary pathways and career, as well as wraparound services to take away those barriers along those. So some of the major requirements that are outlined in that grant itself are to provide direct re-engagement services and maintain re-engagement partners. That's been a requirement in those grants for a long since the initiation of those, as well as provide high school completion access and pathways. So education is a critical element to these grants. Again, it's been a long-standing requirement of that grant since we began this work. Educational progress monitoring. So a grantee has to be able to monitor the educational progress of eligible youth that have been that are in the program, and so that eligible youth verification is really important, as well as individual participant data tracking. So there has to be a pretty large data capacity that the organization has before taking that on. And then obviously then they have to participate in that re-engagement and workforce collaboration networks. So before I pause, I want to go to Molly, who was our lead writer with the re-engagement work, just to make sure I didn't miss any of that large initial scope of that work.
No, Paul, that's great. I would just mention that in terms of that high school completion pathway and access, that the re-engagement program either provides that directly or in partnership. And this does not have to be a traditional high school, if you will, but there's other types of high school completion programs which are within the re-engagement opportunity grantees services.
Awesome. Thank you, Molly. I actually had that in my note to kind of think about, so I apologize. I'm glad you clarified. I appreciate that on that side. So again, what we're trying to do is just kind of broadly establish where some of those requirements are that have been part of those grants for the past 2 bienniums, excuse me. And just a note there that there are some minor clarifying revisions that we're not necessarily covering in this workforce or in this work group, sorry, excuse me, in this work group that we felt is more of an editorial type piece that we're not spending time in this time on. So that next slide are some of the primary updates that were currently under consideration. And so one of the pieces that has been a part of the re-engagement grant, and we have actually added it to the community investment and workforce grants, was letters of reference or support. And this has been a longstanding requirement of a re-engagement grant, but we are looking to increase it from at least 1 letter to at least 2 letters of support. And there'll be a little bit more detail here in just a moment, but that's an area to do that, just because the work that re-engagement is doing in communities is really a lot of times based on partnership and understanding and access for youth. So we want to make sure to make that as a big piece of the application process. Some of the new requirements that are, and maybe not even necessarily new requirements, but being much more explicit on the requirements, because they were somewhat implied, but we want to be clearer on it, is that all re-engagement programs to provide re-engagement services through high school completion, that would be a diploma or a GED. And the idea of that is to, once you get a youth reconnected back to it, we want services and re-engagement services to continue throughout that completion of high school, whatever that looks like. And we have some great programs, and there are great programs across the state that focus on getting youth reconnected back into education, but then that's kind of where they leave off. We want this to be a very continual and service that continues throughout that high school completion option. The second requirement that we're looking at is that all re-engagement programs to have an outreach service plan for out of school youth. So many of our programs have both for in-school youth, because if they're at risk of leaving high school, they are eligible youth. They can be considered eligible youth, but we also want to make sure that we are continually keeping that focus on the youth that are furthest from opportunity within our systems. And a lot of times that'll be youth that are out of school, and they may have been out of school for a couple days, a couple years, or since the beginning of high school. And so we want to make sure that all of our applications and re-engagement programs have a plan to do that. And sometimes that'll mean different things along the way, and that will be pieces that the grant manager would work with on that. And then going back to that letter of reference or support, one of the main reasons we're increasing it to 2 letters is that we want educational applicants to have a workforce partnership or some sort of connection with workforce, and vice versa with workforce applicants having that connection back to education. It's been a big focus, obviously, with requiring that re-engagement and workforce folks can join our convening, and so we want to make sure that our application mirrors that same piece. And then lastly, we want to simplify the application in general by removing the tier 2 separate requirements. And so in 23-25 biennium, in the application process, we had 2 tiers which had different requirements, and that has proven to be pretty difficult in monitoring and supporting along the way. So we're looking to remove that. Not saying that we wouldn't necessarily have some sort of tiered system, but having that separate requirements have proven to be a challenge within that work. So again, I want to pause before we go to open discussion just to make sure, Molly, I didn't miss anything or anything that you wanted to add for clarification.
No, not at this point. Thanks.
All right, awesome. So the next part of it, and encourage folks to come back onto camera and kind of share. We have a pretty small group, so if you want to just use your raise hand function, or if nobody's talking, is totally fine. You can also put comments into chat. But we really want to hear what people have, the reactions, things we should maybe consider further, and maybe some possible benefits of the scope, focus of the re-engagement opportunity grant, as well as the primary updates under consideration within that. So just open it up to the group for conversation or questions. Sam.
I like the idea of requiring more letters of support and varying it from different disciplines. You know, I like that. But I was wondering if, I don't know how to do it, because last time when I read, a lot of the letters of support were form written. Like you know, like someone say, here, sign this, just put your name on the header, put on letterhead, and sign. You know, it's like I read one grant application and it's like the content was all the same. You know, it's like, and to be honest, I've done that too, you know, for other grants. So like I don't know how to get around that. You know, it's because like you say 3 and then you know a grantee sends it to 3 different partners and say, here, just sign this, you know, that kind of stuff.
I think that's a great question, and I might ask Abe and Molly to have a little bit more input onto it. I know that in one of our most recent RFAs that we put out, we actually used a function in the online application system, SM Apply. And so we set questions, and then the applicant could send that out to folks for it, which again, I didn't do any of those reviews. So the folks that had touched that, I'd be interested in that. But I know that is one of the ways we did it, because I think you're highlighting a very good challenge, Sam, and that we really want some context from those folks. But Molly or Abe and Sally, I don't know if you have anything to add and thoughts onto that.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. Yeah, there is a function. I think we did use it in the past, where the person who was kind of, I guess, I'm not sure if it was a letter of support or the process specifically, because it wasn't a grant I oversaw. But we did use there was a function where they could have somebody else and give them access. How was it, to upload or do something? I think Molly knows the details a little better than I do, honestly. But I just remember that we looked into the feature, and yeah, there's something that we could do.
Yeah, so I think we've, on the re-engagement side, so kind of to what Abe is asking, we've had letters all along, and we did do a particular form, kind of like if you write a letter of recommendation, you email the form and then you complete it. And so I think to avoid what Sam is saying about a lot getting copied and pasted, it may come down to how we specify the requirements of the letter of support and reference. And one aspect of those letters is to describe the partnership. So between the 2 particular organizations, and for the Reengagement Opportunity Grant, I think one improvement that we can make in writing the RFA is specifying specifically around re-engaged youth. And so that specific population. So I think that the mechanics of this new online system that Abe was mentioning, I think the mechanics worked. We didn't get any complaints on that, but we might be able to specify a little bit to avoid just lots of copying and pasting. So hopefully that addresses some of the comments.
Awesome. Thank you guys for the clarity on it. And I want Molly Rogers, want to recognize, I see your hand up, but I think we had a couple new people join. So do you want to just, Melissa, do you want to see if the folks that joined, have you been monitoring that?
Sure.
Right,
Let's see if Ryan Detman, if you're available to come off mute, introduce yourself. You're still muted though.
I'm off mute. I thought I could just wave my hands and that would work. No, Brian Detman, Youth Development Oregon Director. Appreciate all your participation. Thanks.
Great. We also have Janelle Theobald has joined us. Janelle, if you're able to come off mute, great. There we go.
Yep, I'm Janelle Theobald on the Development Council, representing youth. I kind of on break in another meeting right now, so I can only really stay for half an hour, but I thought I'd listen in and see what was going on.
Janelle, that's wonderful. So thank you for joining. So Molly, I'm going to turn it, Molly Rogers, sorry, we have two Mollys on the call, sorry. So Molly Rogers, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Hey, I really like the conversation around letters of support. I have seen a lot recently around letters of commitment. And it was what Molly was kind of talking about, was kind of coming and bringing to the table what you're going to do or defining the partnership. But I also think identifying, are there any required partners that need to have that? And I don't know the answer to that, but you know, again, as I write grants, are there any required partners, this education program, a school, are there any that we really need to be able to say, hey, this is on board? Because if it's
Well, I think that's a really good question. So one of the things that may have Molly Burns help with this question too is that I know that if you're not an educational provider providing the educational access and pathway, so you do have to define that in the application, and that's been something longstanding. But in terms of being actual required pieces, I don't know if we've made that decision yet, Molly.
Hopefully I'm understanding. With the current one letter currently required through the Opportunity Grant, you either have to be the education service provider or have a letter of support from education. And so the first letter requirement is education. And so really by adding a second letter, we're really expanding to workforce. We are really saying that if we're really looking at the full scope of re-engagement services as defined in the statutes and administrative rules and guidance, that for really strong, robust re-engagement programs, we need partnerships with education and workforce. And so that second letter is really intended to bring in the workforce development partners and give them a stronger seat at the table with working with the re-engaged youth.
Awesome, thank you, both Mollys on that one. Zan, I noticed you came off camera as well as Bethany. So Zan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I don't think I have anything to add that hasn't been said. Thank you.
No worries. I just wasn't sure if you finished lunch and were joining or right, so perfect. All right, any other questions about the re-engagement adjustments for the Opportunity Grant? I appreciate Molly's work in getting that ready. Any grant managers, anything to add that we might have forgotten or talked about? We talk about a lot in our meetings, so sometimes it's important to know.
Paul, is Brian, you do have Bethany's comment in the chat, which I think is
I
both
may have
a
missed
comment
it.
and a
Apologize.
question.
Okay.
Bethany, so
let's see. Sorry, I thought I had chat open and I did not, so I was looking at some other thing. So that's why it wasn't moving. Let's see. So Bethany, I wonder if there might be consideration for encouraging, if not requiring, a partner letter of commitment for outreach specialized organization. Okay, the reference to reference the out of school youth plan needed. So I don't know, Molly, is that Molly Burns? Is there something that you want to maybe tackle on that, of what your thoughts are with that question in chat?
Sure, that is such a great question, and I'm really glad that you brought it up. The re-engagement can't exist without outreach services to youth who have left the K-12 system before completing. And so one of the recommendations that we're making is that every single re-engagement opportunity grant applicant has an outreach services plan. We stopped short of requiring a letter, and I'm kind of speaking for myself here, not necessarily the whole team. In certain environments, you know, you could get 50 applicants asking for a letter from one organization that's actually doing robust outreach services. And so, we stopped short at that, but put in this recommendation that we're considering to require the outreach services plan to really focus on that critical component of identifying the furthest to reach, the youth that are have left and are really the furthest from opportunities, and bringing them back onto a educational and pathway.
And Beth, I just want to check if that helps address your question, or yet are additional thoughts on that. Feel free to come on mute. Come off mute.
Thanks. I'm just a guest, so I appreciate it. Bethany Kramer here from Oregon Alliance of Boys and Girls Club. And just, I think it's the, you know, that the grant is written in such a way that I think there's a lot more education organizations who would apply because of the onus of having to ensure completion requirements. And so it just felt like, you know, having that additional component would not just, you know, I totally appreciate your perspective. You're right? There's like 16 organizations or applicants who are going to say, well, this one organization does a really good job, so we're going to partner with them. But it doesn't remove the fact that that one organization that's doing the really good work may not have as much financial backing in that grant now. So they're just kind of responding and supporting the primary grantee versus being able to be the grantee and partner with the educational agency. So it's just that perspective of trying to pull in, if there's really strong re-engagement that don't have as strong of education capacity, that there's still kind of that equal weight towards their, like what they're bringing to the table.
That's a very good point. I appreciate that. And Bethany, just also to kind of, we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. So some of our priorities are set just because we have no idea how many people we're planning for on the call. So I appreciate you recognizing that and putting that in chat on that side. So Molly Burns, did you have any other things to add? I think you bring a really good context that I think we'll have to think about how that can apply to that question for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate the comment and the absolute importance of the point. So really appreciate that feedback.
Well, and I just was thinking too, I think one of the points that I'm taking from it too is we want to make sure that we don't put so many restrictions around that high school completion focus that it has to be an educational entity. And so I think Bethany, you're also drawing out a point that we really want to be aware of as we seek to kind of meet both those needs as the legislation lays out. So I think we need to wrestle with that a bit for sure. Awesome. All right. I'm remembering that this meeting actually goes to 1:30. I think last time, if I remember right, I was getting anxious on time and I was half hour ahead of time. So perfect. And we don't have to take the time. That's the nice part about work groups. We don't have to take all the time if we don't need to. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and shift this. So Melissa, if you don't mind sharing the screen again, and we'll start on slide 10. So the other agenda item we had for today is around our community investments grants. And as we talked about last time, one of the pieces that we are shifting from is putting workforce in its own RFA, which we'll talk about here in the next slide as well. But I just wanted to add kind of that context to it. And so the general goals and focus of our community investment grants. They are our broadest grants typically that we offer, and so they serve youth ages 6 through 24 at risk of disconnecting from school or work. So that's pretty broad in that. So it can include anything from prevention to solutions oriented focus. And so you can see that they are governed by several by ORS as well as OARs outlined within that. But the goals of the CI are to support efforts to reduce disparities in educational success and improve graduation rates, reduce youth disconnection from school through increased school attendance and readiness, remove barriers to education, engagement, achievement, as well as success, encourage multi-sector collaboration to support outcomes for youth, and then support educational success, focus on crime prevention, and reduce high-risk behaviors. And so those are very broad goals that we're focused on. It allows a lot of different opportunities. It can be system change work. It can be direct services to youth. It can be program services after school, varying to really just creating more of a system level change work on that. So Abe is our lead writer with our community investments. So we want to pause on this slide, Abe, to see if I've missed anything. You want to add anything to these goals?
No, not at the moment.
Perfect. So then to further focus it down, if we go to this next slide, you can see the scope of activities and what Abe has done, and I appreciate his work, is he's pulled all the kind of scope of activities that we have included across all of the initiatives that we've had in the 23-25 RFA process. And so the scope of activities include things from pro-social and positive youth development activities and programming to those academic interventions and supports to before, after school, and out of school activities. We've seen some increase to summer activities, in fact, this last round of that work, culturally specific programming and supports, youth health and basic needs. So that can be those housing, those mental health supports, as well as the other wraparound supports we talk about in to support youth and families. Case management and mentoring are some of our grants, as well as some specific grants focused on violent crime prevention, intervention, and reentry services. And specifically in our last RFA process, that was around our youth violence and gang prevention initiative in CI. And then, as I talked about earlier too, some of our grants focus on system change and program development, capacity building on those services, as well as new ideas and innovative programming. And a lot of those lived within our solutions initiative around that work, right? Because we want to encourage those new opportunities for youth as they come about on it. So this next slide, and the reason we kind of use these first two slides to preface is the next slide, you can see that we have some primary updates currently under consideration. And the first is to move workforce development and programming to workforce RFA. We just want to make sure that we're being clear about that. And what that is lending an opportunity to do is to discontinue the use of the initiatives. So in previous biennia, we've had initiatives listed under the community investment grant, and those were specifically Promise, Solutions, Youth Violence, and Gang Prevention. And the reason we would want to discontinue that is to make funding more agile and focused on youth served versus stuck within those specific titles of that programming. I already see some head nods. So Zan, I appreciate that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that here in just a minute. And then we would require applicants to identify YDO defined services as part of their application. So that slide just before of scope of activities, the idea would be is that we would have applicants define the scope of activities that they are providing in that grant. And then applicants would identify their reporting capacity in prior YDO grants to determine funding amounts. So in the prior bienniums, our funding amounts have typically been established based on the initiatives, but by this piece, we would focus more on the reporting requirements and the reporting capacity. So one of the big things around reporting capacity in our grants is for being able to provide participant level data, or more of that collective data collection. And so as the idea would be as grant funding increased, then the reporting requirements would increase, and then also focus on folks that have had prior YDO grants in that work. So again, I'm going to pause to see if Abe has anything to add on those before we move into discussion, but those are some of the large, make sure I didn't miss anything here. But Abe, turn it over to you for a sec.
No, nothing really. I think, the idea like that is really kind of base it on what the organizations see or do locally where they're at. These are the services we provide, just do it is what it looks like, right? As opposed to saying, okay, here are we have the, lack for a better word, say, this is what we say you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do, broadly speaking. No, now it's kind of turned around. It's like, no, Now you tell us what you do, how you do it, right? And kind of what's your flavor of describing the specific service or suite of services that make up a program within your organization. That's kind of the idea behind it.
Thanks, Abe. I appreciate that. And so Zen, we'll get to you here. Oh, Sally, did you just have something to add? Sorry, I just thought I saw you on mute. Okay, perfect. So Melissa, if you want to change to the next
Zan
slide.
has her hand up.
Yes, perfect. So Zan, let's actually go there. And Melissa, if you want to bump to the next slide would be great. Perfect. Zan.
Okay, would actually be helpful to be looking at the previous slide to help organize my thoughts. I like the idea of moving the workforce development support and programming to workforce RFA. It's just much cleaner. And I also really like the idea of discontinuing the use of the initiatives under community investment. It just seems like additional work for both the grantee to try and figure out where they fit best, and more work for staff and reviewers to try to figure out what how a group of grants really cluster together and what they have in common, because they don't necessarily have much in common. I like the idea of giving much more flexibility to the grantees themselves to ask for the funds that they need in order to do the work that's specified under community investments in the ORSs. In terms of the requirements, the first is fine. Identifying the YDO defined services as part of their application, that makes total sense. I don't quite understand the reporting capacity and prior funding to help determine funding allocations to grantees. So that, I think, it needs a little bit more explanation. And I'm not sure that if you have a larger program, you necessarily need a lot more money for reporting capacity. It may well be that if you have a smaller program, you're a smaller entity, you might need more help to comply with the reporting requirements. And the larger organizations often already have someone that does this kind of tracking and data collection. So that one was a little counterintuitive to me. And it may well be that it's a self-identified thing and people have to rationalize why they would need a little bit of extra money in order to be able to comply with the data collection element.
Very, very good point. I appreciate that question. So I'll have Abe and Bill maybe make some comments on it. I'll take a quick stab at one of the pieces about reporting capacity in our Promise and Solutions. So Promise required individual participant data collection. And so they had to have date of birth and ethnicity and all of those pieces, where Solutions had a broader, we had more flexibility within that grant. And so I think part of that reporting capacity is less about the organization's ability, but what they would actually have to be required to report. And so, but I do want to turn it over. I see Abe's not it. So I must have been close. So I appreciate that. I'll turn it over to Abe and Bill, if you have some additional comments to add to that, would be great.
Yeah, just kind of what you said there, Paul, in regards to, I think in the context of smaller organizations who maybe have never applied for our funding, the idea would be they'd have less shredded reporting requirements. It's really kind of getting their, dipping their toe, if you will, in the pool, right? As opposed to the bigger organizations, they would be required to have more detail in the reporting, right? And again, it would depend on the funding amounts as well, right? The more, whatever, I guess, if you will, amount you're applying, the higher you're applying for, the more requirements would be asked of you, right? For more money you're asking in regards to grant. The smaller organizations would perhaps be asking for less, but maybe depending, right, have probably less reporting requirements, or be other requirements that are less, right? That's kind of right now what we're kind of playing around with that idea.
Thanks, Abe. Bill, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, I think that the point that capacity and size isn't always a direct correlate, so that we have plenty of small organizations that do super fantastic work, and so larger grants amounts don't always play out in that, in that regard. But to the point of prior YDO grants, I think that piece there was kind of a little bit of a risk management, and that is, if you're a proven entity already, right, that would set you, put you in a place where additional funding was available to you type of thing. I think that that's the point of the prior YDO grants, is just to say that if you're a known entity, a proven entity, you'd be eligible perhaps for a higher, yet to be determined, but something that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was just to maybe add a little bit of clarity what that prior YDO grants means.
And I think appreciate that, Bill. I think one of the things that we heard in when we engaged in community conversations and feedback was, how do we honor the grantees, and as well as after this last RFA process, how do we honor those grantees that have been a part of our work, but then also manage new grantees? And so we're wrestling in that area. Molly Rogers, I see you. I do want to make sure, Sam, did we address your side of the question? I saw in chat that you said Zan kind of hit your question as well, but just want to make sure we addressed your question.
Bill kind of did, like, like how if you got previous grants, you kind of got a leg up or got additional points. But then I just want to say, like, so I guess so basically, if I'm hearing correctly, if you are awarded a grant in the past, you're going to get more favorable reviews or more points on the.
That's so I think that's a piece that we're still working as a team of, like, what does that look like? How do we support that? Because it's, where do we find the balance? And that's actually, I think it's one of the future topics of this work group that we want to kind of wrestle with. Matt, I think ideally one of the pieces we put that bullet in to require of that alignment is to not have that alignment tied to the initiatives, that we feel like we can write that within the requirements of some of those pieces as those get developed. So in terms of how do we balance between new grantees and existing grantees, I think that's work that we still need to bring back to the group for sure. And Sally, I'm not sure, you and I have talked a little bit more about it, so am I missing a piece?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that there isn't preferential treatment for prior grantees. There is, in contrast, space that we've created for new grantees who we haven't funded before, and creating space for them not to compete with the heavy hitters who are accustomed to our grant styles. That we know that there are some grantees that we have funded over and over, so they are familiar. They use language that's familiar to our volunteer review teams. And what we want to ensure we have space for are innovative and new ideas that are coming from folks we haven't funded before, and that part of the risk mitigation there is around having some of those grants be smaller, and thus creating space for prior grantees to be funded again. And that prior grantees, it's reasonable that they would have programs up and running and be ready to be in full reporting compliance at a pretty high level right away, and creating space for those new grantees who aren't familiar, may need additional technical assistance, and from whom we would have very specifically different reporting and outcome expectations that are on par with the funding levels. Does that clarify it?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate your questions.
Yeah. All right, Molly, thanks for waiting. So Molly Rogers.
Actually, that was kind of good because Sam actually brought up another question. I am so sorry to be the bureaucrat on this call. So just understand, I know the perspective I'm bringing to the table, and it's 30 years of watching things ebb and flow. And in the discontinue, I can absolutely support the promise solutions, youth violence, and gang prevention. But I think we do need to articulate that this is not a free-for-all money, paying for swim passes for private schools who have, I mean, we still need to articulate that this is for a very specific group of youth in our communities who are completely at risk of school dropout. And I pulled up the OARs just to make sure I was in line with that, because that's that we need to articulate that it's for somewhere in it, that it's for education, career advancement, crime prevention, and removing barriers to school and work success. So anyway, I don't want to be the bureaucrat, but at the same time, I'm going to be the bureaucrat. And the other part on that is, I think that giving points or allowing, acknowledging existing and new, being a new grantee large or small. It's less about the points in the grant and more about the technical assistance following the grant and the support from the staff to be able to help new grantees. So almost pulling back some money, just articulating a bit of money back to provide just that evaluation technical assistance to new grantees would be kind of a cool thing to do.
Appreciate that, Molly. And I think you bring up a really good point. And Abe and I had quite a bit of conversation specifically around the youth violence and gang prevention. And I think, Abe, I'd have you talk more about it, but I think one of the things about identifying the services provided is a critical element, so that it is really structured around it. And being the nice part about an online application is we can say you have to have that, and you have to define, and we can define it and outline it. And then through that, like the specific service of violence prevention, sorry, I'm losing my words there, is a critical element, because those funds are directly connected to violence and gang prevention activities that we can connect it behind the scenes versus having them identify in that system. But Abe, is there more that you can add to that maybe?
Actually, I appreciate where Molly's come from. I actually agree with everything she said, 100%. I like that you went back and looked it up, actually, because that's kind of what the process I've been going through, trying to get back to basics with the idea of saying, no, what is it that we're supposed to cover and what falls within there, but how can we provide also that flexibility for those grantees to tell us why it falls within the specific, right, the language that's outlined, right? That's kind of where I'm like, how can we make it? And again, right, around, I don't think right now that we're even, I know I'm not thinking of anything sort of point preferences of any sort, right? The idea is, where are you so you are as fair as possible as we can, right? And I think that's what we're right now kind of in internal conversations, like, how do we make sure that we get the right grantees competing with similar grantees? That's what we're trying to right now kind of wrestle with and get that figured out, right? I know I'm not right now thinking about point preferentials, but again, right, we're still kind of figuring that out, trying to get it into focus.
I appreciate that.
I really appreciate that, Abe, because I think one of the other things that happens, and I really, really appreciated how many grantees or organizations that submitted grants, but I saw the rise and the fall of the commission. I'm just gonna be really blunt and honest with you. And the commission was eliminated because it couldn't articulate its outcomes anymore. I watched it, was on it. And I don't want YDO and these grants to fall on the same wayside.
I think that's a very good point and appreciate it. And I think one of the things that we've talked about as a team as well is being very clear on the data reporting requirements so that we know what grants they are, where that data is going to be. And so when we talk about that risk management piece of some grants that aren't in a place to be able to report that data, we do want to support that, but we also have to make sure that we're keeping that data of success and progress with those really are larger grants, which typically have followed in the promise. And so I appreciate that for sure. Bill, I want to check in with you. Obviously, this is a big piece for you with data, so I want to make sure I check in with you.
Thank you. I am in agreement in terms of the focus is still on our the youth that have the highest needs and the communities and community organization and schools that support those youth. And I think part of what the key point here is that being able to meet data reporting requirements is still a priority, and that will come into play with the funding level type of thing. And so really, I see it as kind of it's still we're giving it a different name, doing away with promised solutions. Maybe that'll be replaced with tiers. Maybe instead of 2, there'll be 3 different kind of categories that have a new name, or tier 1, 2, and 3, or something like that. But it is what this is proposing is still very much going to capture kind of the critical nature of being able to deliver data at a certain level, and then receive the technical assistance, almost like an incubator, something that's going to help, value add is going to help them be able to achieve, our applicants, that is, be able to achieve that reporting kind of requirement, which then at a future RFA they'll be eligible for a higher tier, in the future. So the idea is that we're bringing everybody along, and like Sally said, creating space for those, and meeting the unique needs, but at the same time, the ability to report data, and thus us being able to show outcomes and help be able to show what it is and we're achieving will be accomplished.
Perfect. And Zen, I recognize your hand up as well. So the other piece that we've had conversation with is, by not being tied as to these names and these pieces, hopefully we'll have more flexibility, because one of the biggest challenges is when someone comes in as a promise and can't do that individual participant data collection because of the services and that. So we want to make sure that we can really help guide people in a different way. So Zan, just want to check in with you I didn't know if it was prior or not. I just noticed it was okay. Perfect. And checking chat, making sure that I'm not missing that again as well. All right, other thoughts or ideas? Appreciate this. This is I will say, having been a part of developing a work group, this is great. This is the feedback and the conversation that we were really hoping to have. So appreciate folks joining us today for that. Any other questions or thoughts or ideas? All right. Wow. We're actually just right at about an hour, and just to kind of recap. So Melissa, if you want to go to the next slide, would be great, or actually 2 slides. There we go. So our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, July 31st, and we are continuing to narrow down those agenda topics, usually a week or so before, and so be watching out for those Gov delivery messages that are coming out in terms of more specific around that data. You can go into that shared file to see where kind of our planned pieces are, but those are changing as we are getting more into the weeds of the RFA development on that side. Now, we are going to keep these at 90 minutes because we want to ensure that we have enough time for space. And Bethany, I want to just recognize and appreciate you joining us today as a guest and participating. That is really one of our hopes of this conversation, is that our council members and invited participants, as well as our guests, can all engage in it. So we want to try to be purposeful on that, and feel comfortable with the fact that we can shut down 30 minutes early too, which is never a bad thing, I don't think. Within that. But before we close out, just any other comments or questions that people might have? Brian, looks like you still might be on the call, so I don't know if you have anything you want to share as well.
No, just appreciate the work of our grant managers, trying to think through the process and these different steps. I don't know, maybe there's some adage around we're rethinking, and in the rethinking we may come up with some ideas that feel similar but have new names. And appreciate the history and the context, right? So that we remain like nimble and agile, but also maintain the focus on those youth. That's the phrase we've been starting to use, who are kind of farthest from opportunity, and yet still have a ton to offer, but are marginalized or at risk of other penetrating other systems, so that focus is unwavering and will not change, and getting the information that we need, I think, around how our organizations are serving and pushing towards progress and success for young people is critical. So just appreciate the work of everybody, the contributions from our council members, guests, and other stakeholders in the space. So just keep up the good work. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Brian. Molly Rogers wanted to check in. I saw a hand raised and a hand down, so I don't know if there's a reaction. Okay, perfect. All right. With that, again, thank you for everybody joining. Sally, any last minute pieces as co-facilitator of this?
No, just another big thank you to everyone for contributing to this good work.
Well, wonderful, and enjoy an extra few minutes into your day, and hope you all are enjoying some nice weather where you are at across Oregon.